Hello, readers. Welcome back to another episode of Not Reading for Content. We are here today to discuss the first third of The Devils by Joe Abercrombie. We have currently read from the beginning to the end of the chapter in circles. If you have the physical edition, that's 180 pages. Sorry, I can't give you a chapter number because there aren't any. It's not something we have access to. So we will be discussing that. But before we get to the discussion of the book, we do want to talk about a bookish bite. And today it has to do with the subgenre that I specifically have placed this book into. We're just going to discuss the subgenre, whether or not I obviously think that this book exists in it, but I want to know if Leandra agrees. I want to know what we think of the subgenre and just, discuss all together the little nooks and crannies that we see. So I'm going to read a definition that I got from Wikipedia of what grimdark is. So we're going to talk about grimdark fantasy today. So this says grimdark is a subgenre of speculative fiction with a tone, style, or setting that is particularly dystopian, amoral, and violent. The term is inspired by the tagline of the tabletop strategy game Warhammer 40K. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. So, do you agree that this would be grimdark from that definition? And just discuss what you think about the subgenre via what we've been given from Wikipedia.
Yeah, sure. So I'm definitely not an expert in grimdark. You are the person that I'll be personally relying on simply because I've only tried it a couple of times this year. Like, truly, I don't think that I've tried a grimdark fantasy prior to 2025, unless I'm forgetting some titles. That definition, though, is quite interesting. Specifically, the three descriptive words of dystopian, amoral, and violent. I feel as though that hits the nail on the head, especially dystopian. I didn't really think about that. I definitely came up with the concept of it being a bit amoral, a bit crass, possibly, and just following characters having to make some dark decisions that, in our current world may be illegal, may kill some people. You got to do what you got to do in this world. And then violence, of course, there's a significant amount of violence and gore in this book and in some of the grim dark that I've experienced as well. So I think that is 100% true. I do appreciate that this seems to not be inspired by any type of bookish discussion, but by a tabletop game. And I shouldn't be surprised because, nowadays, a lot of times we are seeing books that feature D&D style and people are referencing that and kind of, lit RPG, I suppose, is another term. And those types of things are being utilized. And so I think that's quite interesting because I definitely have been there where I've read a book saying, hey, if you like D&D, this could totally work for you. And so it does make sense that another game is used to properly discuss a book that before the term grimdark didn't really have an appropriate category where you felt, yes, this is what it is. I do think that this is grimdark. What do you think?
Yeah, I do think it's grimdark, and I wonder. I'll have to look and see if I can find it's really hard to find the date that a word is coined or whatever.
Sure.
But Warhammer 40K has its own line of books. I'm pretty sure the
Mm.
game came out before all the books, but the books were inspired by some of the storyline in the game. And so I wonder if when those books became, because the game has been popular for a very, very long time, but when the books became popular, if those were coined as a grimdark, which just expanded into other books, or if it all started with 40 with Warhammer 40K. I'm just curious. I don't know, but that would be interesting to find out. I
Yeah, the
do
chicken or
agree
the
that
egg situation. Is the
yes,
chicken, the egg, what came first? Books, game, who knows?
right. It's gonna be hard to find out, but I might do a little bit of digging and see if I can figure out which one came before the other. But I do agree that The Devils definitely hits the nail on the head with a lot of the description for at least the Wikipedia definition of grimdark. I like that the first sentence says that the first thing that it mentions is a tone or a style of book, because I have seen that in a lot of the grimdark I have read, and I am by no means an expert. I have found within the last year to 2 years that grimdark is something that I really enjoy reading. Mainly, I learned that with starting with the First Law series by Joe Abercrombie, so that is the same author of The Devils. But I've recently read like The Justice of Kings, and the tone of the stories is definitely something like Leandra and I joke because we've talked to romantasy readers when we're trying to get a definition of the subgenre romantasy or the genre blend romantasy. And everyone always says, it's the vibe. You just have to, it's the vibe of the book. And we hate that. But I did actually say that while I was describing grimdark to somebody. It was like, there's just a certain vibe, like a dark and sometimes fun vibe, depending on the story and the author. But yeah, I found myself using those words, and I do think it's because it's the tone, but it does have some variety as well. We were discussing when we first started reading The Devil's humor and whether or not something that is grimdark can be humorous, and I think that's really up to authors' discretion and their writing style. I think Joe Abercrombie does humor really well, and so the books that I've seen, even though we do cover really dark things, we could be in the middle of a murder scene and there will be a funny line that pops up, or somebody's thought process or monologue in their head has something that's just disturbingly funny. And I think that that's not every grimdark. We recently read She Kills a King, and that I don't think had very much humor in it at all or any light. And that is something I will say, with me really enjoying grimdark within the past several years, I have learned that there's a line. um the Game of Thrones, everyone rants and raves about that series and that show, depending on whether or not you're a reader or if you prefer the adaptation. That's grimdark. But I got very tired of the Game of Thrones because it was so much despair, so much hatred and negativity with no hope. Even though I did love the characters in that series, so don't come for me in the comments if you really like that series. I just got tired of it and I wanted more hope and more light. And that is something that I think can shine in grimdark, but it has to be obviously minimal because it still needs to be a grimdark world. It still needs to be something that we do have death and despair. But I think with the characters and with some nuances that you can do with the storytelling, you can still have fun in a grimdark story and not feel so bogged down with it. So it's a subgenre that I have really come to love and enjoy, but it's definitely one that has its niches that you need to look for and like its corners that you could find that you might enjoy.
Yeah, that makes sense. And even I feel as though if an author does it right, I can imagine that the moments where there is a little bit of light or humor, the reader will savor that because it's like, ah, a reprieve. Okay, let's get back into the darkness. But we need to surface for like a hot second, take a breath before we dive back into the ocean and just experience some darker elements. And I will say that this is probably the book that has the most, not to say the most light, but the most humor. So that does break up the gore and the dark world surrounding it. Angie Kills a King, there I feel like there were moments where the author tried to provide humor, but it just didn't hit. And I just didn't think it was funny. So it didn't work for my humor. And so this one, I think the author does a good job of ensuring that there is always kind of a lighter tone. And I think it comes from the fact that like it's not overdone where it feels like weirdly placed. It's just that these characters, they're so used to their world that it doesn't phase them to the point where they all should be depressed. And so
Right.
that's why we have these kind of funny, quirky moments because they're just like, this is just another Tuesday. Like I'm not going to get depressed about this because literally this is how my life has been since day one. And so I think that the author does it really well. Now, to get into the summary of this book, I'm going to keep it short, and you shouldn't be too fearful of huge spoilers. But if you wanted to go into the book blind, probably should pause here, go back, get to page 180, or finish in circles before you return to the episode. But basically, this is a historical grim dark fantasy. I think that we could probably safely categorize it as such, mainly because we have a ragtag group who are making their way across Europe, starting in Italy and trying to work their way towards Troy. And in this ragtag group, we have a vampire, a magician, a crazy werewolf that both of us really appreciate. Danny and I really like Vega. We also have a soldier who just will not die. He wants to at times, but he's been cursed by a witch. We have a street urchin who has been told that she is a long lost princess. And that is really the goal of this journey. And it's also a journey book. So keep that in mind for those who either vibe or don't vibe with journey books. If you went into this blind and you're like, oh, we're on a journey, I hope that you're pleasantly surprised. If not, it's going to be a long narrative for you because I have a feeling we're going to be on the road for quite some time. But at the moment, our characters have paused in Venice and they are in some deep water. They seem to be in what is potentially like a haunted house of sorts. It's been cursed, or at least there's runes from another sorcerer or sorceress, and they are all kind of struggling on their own journeys within this house. And there's just been a lot of obstacles along the way, a lot of themes of religion, of some cultish elements, a lot of amorality, discussions of morality, and a lot of death. But all of our main characters are still going strong, which is, I guess, good to see. We'll see if it continues.
Yeah, so we have so much to discuss, and we're definitely not going to get to everything. So, for those of you who are listening, if you do have things that we don't talk about, please feel free to discuss them in the comments down below. It's one of the reasons that our summary couldn't have been super spoilery, is because we covered 180 pages. So, this is quite a chunky read. There is a lot to kind of dig into. So, I'm excited for this discussion. But I do have a place I would like for us to start, and that's at the beginning, where we first read, I think it was like 1 or 2 chapters, and I gave you my initial reaction to whether or not I thought you were going to enjoy this book, because I was quite worried within the first couple of pages, and I honestly wasn't super enjoying it myself. We were super fast paced. We had Brother Diaz, he's on his way to the Holy City, or to the Pope, essentially, to discuss this new agreement or assignment that he has. He has no idea what he's doing, but you see him in this carriage getting carried through the city, and all of these things happening around him. The streets are so full of religious zealots, I guess, of people who are following the saint of the day and flogging themselves or running over people. And it happened to be, I think, a saint of the disabled people. I can't remember exactly how they phrased that, but that ended up causing some problems because the people who were in the street couldn't get out of the way. And he mentioned that. It was just so fast paced. And then the second chapter, we had Alex be introduced. And Alex is our long lost princess, which she doesn't know this at this point, but she is being hunted by people because she gambled something and lost and didn't gain the money back. And the person wants their money. And so she's being chased through the streets in the same location. And you see a whole bunch of chaotic stuff there, her jumping underneath a carriage and slime coming up slimed with like guck and grossness, and then someone of course catching her and beating her to a pulp, like we had, or trying, I guess, almost beating her to a pulp. But it was just very, very fast paced. And what I was disappointed in, one, it was very much in your face right at the moment. There was no like tiptoeing in. And we didn't get a lot of character development within those first couple of chapters. And I was very surprised because I have read Joe Abercrombie before. And one of my favorite things about him is the characters and his ability to make you really see a character on page. And I was a little concerned because there was also a whole bunch of poop references, which I know that you're not a fan of. So
No.
while I'm waffling on, I want to give you the mic to talk about what you originally thought, because I was very worried at the beginning that this was going to be a miss for you. So what were you thinking in those first couple of chapters?
Oh, goodness me. Yeah, it was quite humorous because as I was listening to your own, messages of warning, you were like, Leandra, I don't know. I'm worried. I'm gonna be honest, I'm worried. And I was like, oh my gosh, great, perfect. Can't wait to start this book because Danny had started it before me. And yeah, I'll say it. I was not a fan of the first couple chapters just because it was quite chaotic. We didn't have much grounding. And I feel as though there was also a lot of repetition regarding the certain humor that I don't like, and we definitely won't harp on it for too long. But for those who don't know, I am not amused, I'm not impressed by what we can call potty humor. I think that we have functions as creatures, as humans, as animals. We poop, we pee, we vomit. Things happen. Bodily functions are just things that they shouldn't be taboo. And I just don't really like, pardon the pun, that they are the butt of a joke. I am I just kind of roll my eyes, and I know that people of all ages really enjoy that kind of humor. I find it to be low-hanging fruit, but I can accept it, right? Like if it happens once or twice, I'm like, okay, fine. We got to please all the people, all the different types of, people with different funny bones, but it is a lot. Like there are times when we keep being reminded of, like anytime fecal matter is mentioned, a bowel movement of some sort, it really is for humor. And that's, I will say that at this point, I am very tired of that, because whenever it's mentioned, I know it's meant to be a form of comic relief. And that's what takes me out of it. Like still today, it takes me out of it, but it was very much emphasized in the first couple chapters. It's mentioned like 3 times, because Alex falls into the butt of a donkey, and it's like crusted dung is on her face, and then we're reminded of that. And then when she is, face to face with, this big burly assailant who is chasing her, she's trying to talk her way out of, obviously being in trouble. And there's this description of him looking at her as though she is a goat and a turd is coming out of the butt. And I was like, why? What are we doing here? Like what, that wasn't even pertinent. At least her like running through the dirty streets and running into like some type of form of cattle or, farm animal. Okay, sure, it makes sense. But I was just like, now we're just really trying to emphasize poop in this story. And so that's the only thing that I'm not impressed by. That I'm quite tired of. But you guys won't hear me, harp on it too much longer. But it is, I do find that kind of humor grating. And so I knew your worry right off the bat. I was like, yep, I know why she's worried because I am too.
Yeah, luckily, I do think that after those first 2 chapters, a lot of the things that I was worried about, including that type of humor, mellowed out a bit. It is definitely still apparent. It's something that we come back to frequently, especially when Balthazar is on scene. I think his character, for whatever reason, being a necromancer, he has to deal with the human body a lot, and so I think that every time he's on scene, I'm like, "Ooh, what are we gonna do now?
Uh-oh.
What's gonna be mentioned now?" But I do think, like, as far as character development, as far as, the fast-paced, kind of in your face, not stopping to consider the small things and get to know our characters, I think that that has really slowed down, within the pages that we covered in the first third. So I also do want to talk about the introduction, I guess, of all of our characters, kind of the surprises. And we don't have to go through all of them because there are a lot of characters in this book. But if we just want to focus on a few of our favorites, I really have enjoyed Jakob's character. I liked the not surprise because I do think that we got enough breadcrumbs throughout that he was someone who is a little bit supernatural. He's not a Knights Templar anymore, and we didn't know why. And it continued to talk about how he would outlive or out work his body. And then we have the scene where he dies in the big battle scene with all of the animal people. And in my head, because that was the end of the chapter, in my head, I was like, he's going to come back to life. And that's why he's actually part of this ragtag crew, because he can't actually die. I have really loved his character because, one, he's super old. And so he has a lot of insight into the world, the war between humans and elves. But also, I think that he reminds me a lot of another one of Joe Abercrombie's character. It was Logan Nine Fingers from The Blade itself. And I love a character who is, and hopefully grows from this, but I like a character who is almost self-suffering. Like, I want to atone for my sins. I've done XYZ, and I need to make sure that I can be a better person, even though whenever you're sitting there looking at him, you're like, I feel like you are kind of a good person, especially in comparison to who you are surrounded with. But I really enjoyed his character, and then Sunny. I think Sunny is. I like Viga as well. Viga is like a chaotic, drop in the bucket that we have, but Sunny, the elf, we get a lot of her perspective on some of the things that she has had to deal with, and she is who I thought of when you were saying these characters have lived in this world for a really long time, and it's just a Tuesday, so we're not going to complain about it. I think is she the one? No, I think it was Vega. One of them says, I'm not gonna dislike Alex because I've been charged with taking care of her, and I don't wanna make myself suffer by taking care of someone I hate. So I'm gonna make the decision to like her. So that was another thing for Vega. For Sunny, we get to see her thought process on being in a circus and essentially being sold around as human entertainment, in a sense of they get to see her suffer because humans hate elves in this book. So those are the three characters that are kind of the highlight of the story for me. I really enjoyed the characters. And I'll just shout out for a minute. I know we've talked about this, but The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is a movie. I don't know if it's also a book. I actually should look that up. But this reminds me of a darker version of that, because we have a whole bunch of supernatural beings. In The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, we had like literary creatures that were coming together to, fight the good fight type of a story. And I've had a good time with it. What are your favorite characters in the story?
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought up Sunny because in my very brief summary, I was listing off all of the supernatural creatures and I failed to mention the elf, especially because elves are very much part of this story in the lore that created this world, because it's an alternate history as well. The fact that elves are very much discriminated against, they are deemed an infestation that has the goal of ridding the world of humans. Obviously, that's the human story. I'm waiting to kind of hear the other side to see if that's true, or if it's just, hey, it's an enemy, so we're gonna really view them as horrific, when humans have, proven they're not great either. They can be pretty horrific themselves. And I think Sunny is a really good depiction of that, just because my heart goes out to her. I like how kind of weirdly aloof she is and humorous, and yet she also kind of craves this idea of a family. There's a moment when they are in, I think they're either on their way to Venice or they're in Venice, and she's reflecting on the ragtag group itself. Oh, Jakob is the grandfather, Baptiste is the mother, I think Baron Ricard's described as the uncle. Like, she's listing all these things, and she's like, oh, okay, now this metaphor has gone out of proportion, especially because no family actually has an elf. Like, that wouldn't be a thing. And she just kind of accepts that she will always be on the outskirts. And I also like her abilities to, like, she holds her breath and she just disappears. And I think it's Alex at one point who asks, how do you do that? And Sunny just says, I just do it. It's not really something I think about or I had to train myself to do. And so it's just a really lovely character that we're slowly getting to know. And I will say that at the beginning, we, as you said, we're kind of rushed into this process. Suddenly we have these millions of characters, don't really know what they mean to each other, especially because there is a history. And that might be a weakness that I will acknowledge, that a lot of times they reference past experiences, like, we should have quit at Barcelona, we should have done this. And I was like, well, I wasn't there. And so I don't really know your relationship. So it's going to take a hot second for me to actually be invested in the relationships that they forged, like between Baptiste and Jakob, etc. But now that we're getting almost periodic chapters where we zero in on a character, like we've done that with Viga as well, and I do really appreciate her. I think that she represents an interesting perspective in that she's also been ostracized. She has markings, tattoos all over her body that are words of warning, so that people are aware that she is a Viga wolf, a werewolf from the Nordic country, a Norse wolf, which makes her ever more dangerous, ever more volatile. And she just has to accept that people aren't going to accept her. They're going to immediately judge her. So she might as well be who she is and not really take the time to worry or feel badly about herself. It's quite exaggerated at times, but I also kind of enjoy the humor and her wanting the good meat versus the bad meat. And I think she had the best introduction because we end up having Jakob, open the cage of the carriage, and she comes out as the Vega werewolf, and it is a sight to see. She destroys and kills a lot of people, a lot of things, and I just think that the werewolf's POV, because we were in her head, was really fun, and really kind of terrifying at the same time. But there were those moments of relief, and you could kind of see Vega shine through the wolf as well, like this idea that both of them can't necessarily be separate entities, like they definitely influence each other. So yeah, I think Vega and Sunny are my favorite, although Alex is growing on me as well. The princess, I do like her, especially because she's just like, oh, what have I gotten myself into? like I have to just be this princess now and I might die. And so she's had to come to terms with some things, and I find her quite endearing while
Mhm.
also being a bit of a go-getter and being a thief. And I think she's quite funny, because there are moments where she's like, "Oh, they think I'm a princess. Wait until they find out I'm a piece of shit. like this is not going to go great." And I need to actually pause on this one really lovely moment that made Brother Diaz a bit endearing to me too. He's grown on me. I still don't like him as much compared to like most of the other characters, but there's a moment where he helps, I think it's Brother Diaz who helps Alex learn how to, she's starting to learn her letters because she didn't learn how to read or write, being a child who, grew up on the street. And she is just delighted that she can write an A, the first letter of her name, Alex. And that, I thought that was a really lovely scene. And so I definitely have to highlight that.
Yeah. I also with him, because Brother Diaz is probably my least favorite character out of everyone so far. I did like the change in his thought process when that scene happened because up until that point, it had all been about him. Like, what had I gotten myself into? What have I done to be put in this circumstance? Like, I really just wanted to, be acknowledged for the great human being I am and be put up in some cushy place and be able to do whatever I want to do. And when he has that moment where he helps her learn how to write an A, he has a thought process in his head of being really proud of her and wanting to help her more. And so I do think that scene endeared me a little bit more to him. But I do really like Alex. I think that she is an interesting character to follow because of the fact that she does have that. I love a history where somebody comes from the streets and they have to completely switch into being in noble society. I think it's so fun. And in this type of scenario too, we don't know what she's headed into because we have this scene where she meets her uncle and her uncle saves her from the people who were hunting her, trying to hurt her at the beginning. And her uncle tells her that her mother was the rightful heir of the throne for Troy. And her mother's younger sister, so her uncle is the one telling her this, so his sister as well killed their older sister, and that person's name is Eudoxia. So Eudoxia has taken over Troy and has had sons herself, and she is in the dark arts. She's become a sorcerer who is obsessed with the notion of having a soul and trying to figure out where a soul resides in someone, the weight of a soul. And to do her research, she has done some experiments putting humans and animals together, which is where some of the animal creatures that came into play in the battle scene came from. And I like the fact that Alex, even though she views herself as, this piece of shit that doesn't have any relatable skills to this noble society, I think that she's in for not a rude awakening, but I think it'll be a surprise to her how her skills do help her with the kingdom that she's getting ready to take over because they are currently supposedly living in peril because of Eudoxia and her dark magics and kind of taking over by force of the city of Troy. So I'm interested to see how that kind of works out. I also really enjoyed how Alex went into it full throttle. Like she made the decision of okay, well, I guess this is what I'm doing. And if I'm going to do it, I'm going to go 100%. And this is what, like, I think they were all trying to decide where they're going to go. And she interrupts all of these like magical creatures. And she's like, no, we're going to Venice. I am your royalty essentially. You must follow my instructions because of the papal binding that was put on all these supernatural creatures to help her. That's another thing we should discuss, the fact that they're kind of doing this against their will. But yeah, she just kinda goes in wholeheartedly and is like, okay, if I die, like, I guess I die, but this is what we're doing for now.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the binding, because we've talked a bit around the circumstances as to why this ragtag group is, bringing this to be princess to Troy in the first place. And it actually brings another comparison to mind for me. This setup is very much Suicide Squad. Where there are a bunch of villains, like some of them have been imprisoned, and now they are forced to go ahead and maybe save the world or do whatever, justice is requiring of them, and they don't really have a choice. Like, the idea is, well, you do this for your freedom. If you step out of line, we kill you, or you die, or whatever the case is. Here it's a bit more mild, and I use mild as like probably not the best term because it also sounds horrific. But this little pope, I think she's like a 9-year-old pope, she bestows on them this requirement. And it's not a curse, but it is like a writ saying, you must follow this order under God. And if you don't do your best to, bring this princess to her final destination, then you will get very sick. And you're not even allowed to have bad thoughts. Like, you have to be nice, which I think is quite funny. And obviously, we see the result of that pretty immediately, because Baltazar, who is the newest addition to the ragtag group, as far as a villain, quote unquote, who's been imprisoned and now has been forced to join them. Everyone else seems to really have history. He, Brother Diaz, and Alex are like the newest additions. Everyone else we've kind of mentioned have worked together in past circumstances. He is having none of it. His goal as a magician is to basically try to escape. He's constantly thinking about that. He's had at least one failed attempt in the past, and whenever he thinks something horrible or is hoping to leave everyone behind, he gets violently ill, and it is thoroughly described, which is not my favorite thing. But I do think that it's an interesting dynamic that these people are forced to abide by this. And so they really can't stray, even if they want to. They have to continue on this very dangerous mission.
Yeah. I think so. Balthazar, I think, is actually a good place maybe to end our discussion for today, because he is the reason for where our characters end up at the end of the chapters for today's pages, or for this episode's pages. So Balthazar, in his trying to get out of the papal binding, he's been rather clever in trying to find a way that he can both give himself the resources to try this task of his to break the papal binding, while also helping the mission so he doesn't get violently ill. And he finds himself constantly having to shift his thought process to helping the princess instead of his, ultimate goal of getting out. And he has created this means of, they have to go in and get an artifact for someone. They've made a deal for safe passage to Troy. They have to provide this artifact for this person, and Balthasar gives them a way of doing that. But while doing that, he also had them gather a whole bunch of items that he needed to create this scenario that kind of entraps all of our characters in this house of illusions. And so that's where they are at the end of the pages, is they're all living their own nightmares. And it was quite sad, like, seeing what all of them are afraid of, and especially Sunny. I just, once again, my heart does go out to her, because she just wants to be loved and accepted, and she is in a world that has been taught to hate her. And yeah, so Balthazar is an interesting character, because he is on the side, quote unquote, of our ragtag gang, but he also is working against them at the exact same time. And so he creates an interesting dynamic for them to have to, a hurdle for them to have to go through, because they already have a lot against them. And now they also have someone working from the inside out to destroy their mission.
Right. And they're just so dependent on him. They're very vulnerable in this moment. And so this will be an interesting growing opportunity. We'll see if Baltasar either successfully, detaches himself, and then maybe he'll have the decision to stay with the group to help them out, get them out of the house, or it'll be another failure. either by choice or simply because he failed once more. And so now he's still bound to these people and having to save them. But I think that he's the one who probably will see the most character growth. We'll see all of them grow and maybe hopefully grow closer together as they become invested in each other's safety and in the mission itself. We're seeing Alex grow and others as well. But I think that Baltazar is the one who is the most resistant at the moment to this entire venture, and so he's the one who has to climb the highest. He's got to climb that mountain. He's got a lot more ground to cover, and so this will be a very pivotal moment as we get into the second third of the book. And speaking of that, friends, so keep in mind that we are currently at page 180. We've read 180 pages, and we are going to be reading another 180 pages in this next section for our second discussion of the book, meaning that we are going to wrap up at page 361. So we're asking you to read one extra page. Sorry about that, just the way that things work out. And the last chapter that you're going to be reading in full is Our Latest Last Stand. So we're reading from Nothing But the Truth through Our Latest Last Stand. And as soon as you get to the start of The Angel of Troy, stop. Which will be interesting seeing that title, because obviously our destination is Troy. And so we might be ending on a bit of a cliffhanger or something very exciting. So yeah, this should be quite interesting. But I'm also getting a bit ahead of myself. So let's answer our 3 questions that we typically answer at the end of these discussions. So Danny, what is the rating that you're currently feeling out? What is, I don't remember what the questions are. What is something that you are predicting to happen or you would like to know moving forward? And what is another question? Oh, what's your favorite character of this section? Oh my gosh, guys, we are dusting off the cobwebs a little bit. We've had too much fun simply having bookish discussions. I got to get my book club hat back on. So yeah, Danny, answer those 3 questions in whatever order you'd like.
So I'll start with my rating. And I'm really enjoying this. I think that I've had a lot of fun getting back into Joe Abercrombie's writing. I do think that this is different. I've had several people mention that to me, that this is very different from The Blade itself, and I would agree, but I am still really enjoying it. So I would say my rating right now is probably a 4.5. I think that this has a lot of potential to be a wild ride moving forward, and I can already see myself gathering some attachments to these characters and some worry for what will happen with them in the future. So yeah, I think that a 4.5 feels right for me. As far as my absolute favorite character, I know we talked about this a lot in the discussion today. I have to give it to, it's between Jakob and Sunny. I think I'd have to give it to Sunny though. I think we've had a lot more, I think, development from Sunny as far as like what her history is and what she wants in the future, like the things that she kind of longs for. And so I really like her character. So she would be my favorite. And then for questions that I have, I would be curious to know if Balthazar changes his mind. If he has these moments of growth and appreciation for the group that he's been accepted into, and whether or not, it be for his own good or, against his will or not against his will, that he has to do it because he's owned by the Pope. I hope he finds some appreciation for the people that he's been in league with in this mission. I don't know if that will happen. I almost wonder if we're going to have a complete betrayal where he ends up getting somebody killed and that's what ends up changing the game. I'm not sure, but that would be my one question, would be, is he going to come to the quote unquote side of good? If there is a side of good in this, that would be what I would want to know. What about you?
So for my own question, I think I might answer these things in reverse order just because you sprung to mind something that I want to know, is what we will, if there will be a question of if Alex truly is the princess, because there really isn't too much solidity over her actually being the princess. Yes, the timeline kind of matches up. Her name is Alex, but I don't know if there'll be a time where either it's confirmed that she very much is the princess, or that she starts to question herself, being like, oh, what if I could see it being a plot device where it's planted into her and others saying, you were just taken from the street, you were a convenience, because
Yeah.
obviously we simply don't want Eudoxia and her sons to rule. And so there could be a thing there. Or I'm interested more in the elves. I
Mm.
want to see
Yeah.
us engage with that and see what's going on, and see what the truth is, because that's another thing I don't fully believe at the moment. I want to hear the other side of the story on that one. And then for a favorite character, I fully support your choice of Sunny. I will go with Alex as a second choice, just because I can see a lot of growth in her. She's kind of the, rough and tumble, rough around the edges kind of character. And like you said, going from almost rags to riches, and we are seeing her become more of a princess, learning how to talk the talk, walk the walk, and also assert herself. So I've been really enjoying growing on, like, she's growing on me as she's growing up, and like having to kind of face this world and finally have a bit of a family. I feel like that she's going to find that she's dependent on these people, and she's going to deem them her family when she's been living on the streets for so long alone. And then as far as a rating goes, what's interesting is I would have DNF'd this book after a few chapters. I would have been like, you know what? No, as we expected, this isn't for me. Obviously, for the book club, I continued to read, and it helps. I do have the audio. I think
Yeah.
that is very pivotal for me too. And these discussions are really enjoyable. Like, I'm really glad that we've had this discussion. I think this is a great book to discuss in a book club, because there's a lot going on, a lot of characters to react to, and just the magic and everything like that. At the moment, I'm sitting, I'll say the discussion has raised it for me to a 3.75. At the moment, I'm not sold. There are still like quite a few things that haven't really vibed with me.
Mhm.
And I do think if I didn't have the audio, this would be a harder thing for me to continue reading like as readily. And so I have to keep that in mind. But this is feeling like a 3.75, which arguably is the highest grimdark fantasy rating I've given so far. So I guess so that's good. But yeah, we will have to wait and see how the narrative progresses, how these characters face their current challenge as well as the future challenges that are definitely going to be in their wake. And we'll see how Danny and I react to it, how you all react to it next week. We'll see you guys next Friday. Happy reading.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Not Reading for Content. Be sure to check the description for a schedule of our upcoming reads for this season. For reminders and other updates, you can follow the podcast on Instagram at Not Reading for Content. Where else can the listeners find you, Leandra?
I have a booktube and an Instagram. My booktube is at Leandra the TBR0, and my Instagram is at Leandra_the TBR0. How about you, Danny?
I have the same platforms. Both can be found at danny.dabbles. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to tune in next Friday for our next episode.